Picture this. You're wheeled into an operating room.
Okay, stressful start.
Right. Very stressful. Your appendix just ruptured. You're in agonizing pain. The monitors are just frantically beeping. And it is this pure, life or death moment.
Oh, absolutely. Total crisis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, the hospital administrator walks in and says, hey, we're going to hold a democratic vote among the people in the waiting room to decide exactly where to make the incision.
Yeah, you would literally lose your mind.
You would. Because you don't want a crowd of, well-meaning locals just guessing the math. You want the surgeon.
Right, you want the one person in that room who actually spent 12 years studying human anatomy to take total control.
Exactly. I mean, when you're flying through a storm, you want the pilot steering, right? Not the flight attendants passing out ballots to all the passengers to vote on the wing flaps.
Yeah, that's a recipe for a crash.
Right. So in our everyday lives, we rely entirely and happily on expertise. But then you step into the world of modern politics, and suddenly, that entire logic gets flipped upside down.
It completely inverts.
We take the most complex, high-stakes decisions, imaginable decisions that impact millions of lives, and we say, actually, everyone should have an equal say here, completely, regardless of what they know.
It is a wild juxtaposition when you phrase it like that.
It is. So welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are unpacking an incredibly uncomfortable tension for you.
Yeah.
We're asking a question that, frankly, feels a little dangerous to even say out loud in a democratic society.
It's definitely a taboo topic.
It is. The question is, should experts ever have more political power than ordinary citizens?
And what's fascinating here is how that single question forces a collision between two ideas we hold incredibly dear.
Break that down for us. What are the two ideas?
Well, on one side, you have the foundational premise of democracy. That insists on the absolute, moral equality of all citizens.
One person, one vote.
Exactly. Doesn't matter if you're a janitor or a neurosurgeon, you get one vote. Your voice has equal weight. But on the other side, you have the undeniable reality of expertise.
Which says what? Exactly.
Which insists that objective knowledge actually matters, and that letting ignorant people make highly technical decisions can cause catastrophic harm.
So it's equality versus competence.
Precisely. We're pulling this tension apart today because it is, without a doubt, the defining friction of how modern society functions.
So why, when it comes to running an entire country, do we suddenly think the people in the waiting room should hold the scalpel?
That is the big question.
That's the mission of this deep dive. We're going to explore why that operating room logic is so deeply tempting to apply to government, why doing so could actually destroy the moral heart of democracy, and how we might somehow find a balance.
A balance between needing wise decisions and demanding equal respect.
Exactly. Let's jump right into the allure of the expert, because I think if we're all being honest with ourselves, there's a part of us that secretly wants the experts to just, take the wheel.
Oh, absolutely. And to understand that temptation, you really have to step back and look at the sheer, terrifying complexity of the modern world.
It's a lot to process.
It is. I mean, go back a couple of centuries, and local politics was largely about observable realities.
Like, do we build a bridge over this river?
Right. Where do we put the town well? You didn't need a PhD to have a valid, rational opinion on whether a bridge would be useful. You just needed to live there.
That makes sense. But today,
the scale has shifted completely. Modern governance is no longer observable to the naked eye. We are dealing with layers of technical complexity that are, frankly, just staggering.
just looking at the scope of what a modern government handles is exhausting. I mean, we're talking about global monetary policy, calibrating interest rates to manage these massive, invisible economic forces.
Yes. And epidemiological modeling during a pandemic. The regulation of artificial intelligence.
Geopolitical military strategy involving cyber warfare, climate science, digital infrastructure. I mean, the intricacies of constitutional law.
It's endless.
It is. How is any single human being supposed to have an informed opinion on all of that?
They aren't. It is cognitively impossible.
So we're all basically just guessing outside of our day jobs.
Pretty much. Let's take that AI engineer, for example. You could have a brilliant software developer who deeply understands machine learning algorithms, neural networks, the exact architecture of these systems.
Right. They're an undisputed expert in that specific domain.
Exactly. But put them in a room and ask them to restructure the international migration quota system.
Oh, man.
Right, to balance domestic labor shortages with humanitarian asylum claims. They are completely out of their depth.
So we are all profoundly ignorant about almost everything outside our specific narrow lane of experience.
We are, all of us.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we are all essentially ignorant about 99% of how the world runs, the stakes of letting us vote on it are terrifyingly high.
They're monumental.
A bad decision in these arenas isn't just a bridge washing away. A bad decision in monetary policy means millions of families lose their savings to hyperinflation.
Or a bad decision in public health means a virus sweeps through a vulnerable population.
Exactly. So from a purely practical standpoint, it's entirely natural to look at this and ask, why on earth should a highly trained epidemiologist have the exact same amount of influence over a pandemic response as someone who gets all their medical information from a Facebook meme?
It's a very fair question. And we need to frame this carefully because the desire to hand power to experts isn't usually born out of malice or some, cartoonish elitism.
Right, it's not villains twirling their mustaches.
Not at all. It's fundamentally a protective instinct. It's about harm reduction. The reality is that the general public is incredibly vulnerable.
Vulnerable to what exactly?
To being severely misinformed. They're often emotionally reactive to the 24-hour news cycle. They are highly susceptible to sophisticated propaganda campaigns.
I mean, I'm not sure I completely buy that we are all just helpless victims of propaganda, but I will absolutely concede that people love a catchy slogan.
Oh, slogans are incredibly effective.
Right, tax the rich.
Yeah.
Or drill baby drill. It fits perfectly on a bumper sticker. It feels really good to yell at a rally.
It does, but it tells you absolutely zero about the underlying legislative mechanisms required to actually execute those ideas without collapsing an economy.
Exactly, and compare that vulnerability to how an expert is trained to function.
Well, experts are absolutely not immune to bias, and we will get into that heavily later, but their baseline methodology is just fundamentally different.
How so?
They are trained to evaluate empirical evidence. They are taught to build long-term predictive models rather than just reacting to whatever might, win the next election in 6 months.
So they have a totally different incentive structure.
Ideally, yes. They are insulated from the cheap political theater that usually captures the public's attention, so handing them the reins feels like a logical, necessary safeguard against our own worst, most reactive impulses.
It's a compelling argument. In fact, it's so compelling it almost pushes you into a corner. Let me try an analogy here to see if I'm tracking this right.
Let's hear it.
Okay, imagine you, the listener, are on a massive cruise ship in the middle of the Pacific. Suddenly, the radar picks up a Category 5 hurricane forming directly in your path.
A nightmare scenario.
Right. So the captain, who has spent 30 years studying naval navigation and meteorology, gets on the loudspeaker and says, "We need to turn hard north immediately into the rougher current to skirt the edge of the storm."
The expert advice.
Exactly. But down on the Lido deck, a really charismatic passenger grabs a megaphone. He says, "No, tuning north means the boat rocks and my drink spills. Let's just sail straight ahead into the calm water. The storm is a hoax anyway."
And let me guess, the passengers demand a vote.
You demand a vote.
Harrowing scenario, and a perfect illustration of the technocratic argument.
Right. Because asking the passengers to vote on how to navigate a hurricane sounds wonderfully democratic on paper. Power to the people.
But the ship is still going to sink.
Exactly. Everyone is going to drown with their precious equal voting rights perfectly intact. So here is my pushback.
Go for it.
If we accept the premise that the world is a hurricane of complex issues and that voters are constantly being swayed by the guy with the megaphone, shouldn't we just hand the keys over to the specialists right now?
Just give up on the voting part altogether.
Yeah. I mean, why even pretend the passengers should have a say in navigating the storm? Let the captain steer.
I hear that it's the ultimate technocratic temptation. But we have to look very closely at the limits of your cruise ship analogy because it actually reveals why surrendering the keys to the experts is incredibly dangerous.
Okay, tell me why. What's wrong with the analogy?
Well, navigating a hurricane is a purely technical problem. The goal is universal and universally agreed upon. Do not sink.
Right. Everyone wants to live.
Exactly. Therefore, the only question is how to live, which is a technical calculation. But politics is almost never a purely technical problem.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
How is managing the economy or the climate not a technical problem?
Because the goals are not universally agreed upon. Let's stick with your ship. What if the passengers are not voting on how to avoid a storm? What if they are voting on which port the ship should sail to for their vacation?
Oh,
Okay.
That's different.
It is. The captain might be an unparalleled genius at steering the vessel, But does that mean the captain's preference for going to Alaska is inherently more valid than the passenger's preference for going to Hawaii?
Ah, okay. The captain is an expert at the mechanics of the ship,
Uh-huh.
but not an expert on what makes a good vacation.
Precisely. And this is where we hit the profound limits of the lab coat. Politics isn't a math problem.
It's messy.
Very messy. The moment you step out of a controlled laboratory and into human society, decisions cease to be merely about equations. They become fundamentally about values.
So it's about what we care about, not just what works.
Right. They are about priorities, massive trade-offs, and deciding whose interests actually matter in any given moment.
The sources draw a really sharp line here between means and ends.
Hmm.
Break that down for us, because I think this is the key to the whole debate.
It is the absolute core of the issue. Experts are incredibly adept at understanding the means, the how.
Okay,
The how.
right. If you implement policy X, it will likely lead to outcome Y. They possess the factual knowledge of what policies will actually do in the physical or economic world.
But deciding which goals are worth pursuing the ends, that is not a scientific calculation.
Exactly. You cannot solve for justice on a whiteboard. Determining the ends is a collective moral choice that a society has to make together.
Let's ground this in reality. The climate change debate is probably the most perfect, painful example of this means versus ends collision.
Oh, definitely.
We have climate scientists who are the undeniable experts on atmospheric chemistry. They can look at the data, run the models, and say with absolute certainty, if we continue emitting X amount of carbon, global temperatures will rise by Y degrees and sea levels will rise by Z inches.
Yes, that is the means. That is the technical reality, and denying it is just ignoring gravity.
That is the realm where expert authority should be virtually absolute. They own the facts.
Agree. But, and this is a massive but, those same brilliant climate scientists cannot scientifically determine the moral and social trade-offs required to actually stop those emissions.
Right, because the science doesn't tell you who should pay the price.
Exactly. Think about a real-world scenario. Look at what happened in France a few years ago with the Yellow Vest protests.
Such a clear example.
It is. The technocrats, the experts in Paris, looked at the climate data and said, we need to lower emissions. The most efficient, mathematically sound way to do this is to impose a steep carbon tax on fuel.
And on a spreadsheet, that is a flawless technical solution. It perfectly addresses the means.
But they completely failed to account for the ends. They failed to account for the lived reality of the people outside their bubble.
And what was that reality?
Well, the experts sitting in metropolitan Paris, who take the subway to work, didn't realize what that policy meant for a rural factory worker who has to drive 40 miles every single day just to put food on the table.
Right. It was an abstract problem to the experts, but a survival issue for the workers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The experts created a mathematically perfect policy that literally priced working-class people out of their own lives. And the result wasn't a beautifully balanced atmosphere.
The result was chaos.
The result was people putting on yellow vests, setting cars on fire, and shutting down the country. The science didn't tell the experts how to balance emissions against a family's ability to buy groceries.
And that failure points to what we can call the human flaw of the expert class.
What do you mean by human flaw?
Well, we have a very dangerous tendency to view experts as infallible, objective calculating machines. We think of them almost like computers.
Right, just pure logic engines.
But they are human beings. An expert can be technically brilliant in their highly specialized field, yet simultaneously morally narrow, socially detached, and deeply confined by their own class background.
Ah, the expert bubble.
Yes, exactly.
We all know the stereotype, but it's rooted in a systemic reality. Who generally gets to become a high-level policy expert?
It's not usually the guy working double shifts at the diner.
No, it usually requires immense resources. It means attending elite universities, living in affluent, highly concentrated zip codes, usually major coastal cities or capital hubs.
And socializing almost exclusively with other highly credentialed people.
Right. They develop their own culture, their own shared economic interests, and their own massive blind spots.
And that leads to intense overconfidence outside their domain. Think back to the early days of the pandemic.
Oh boy, yeah. Let's go there.
You had epidemiologists who understood the molecular structure of the virus perfectly. Their models of viral transmission were incredibly sophisticated.
Nobody's doubting their biology degrees.
Right. And based on that pure biological data, the obvious technical solution was a total, prolonged societal lockdown.
Right, because biologically, if nobody moves, the virus can't spread. flawless logic.
Flawless biological logic, but many of those same experts fundamentally misunderstood the psychological, social, and economic toll of a 6-month lockdown.
Especially on a working-class family living in a cramped, two-bedroom apartment without high-speed internet or the ability to work via Zoom.
Exactly. The expert might have a comfortable home office and a salary that deposits automatically regardless of whether the local restaurants are open.
So they understood the biology, but they completely misunderstood ordinary life.
Yes. If you hand ultimate power over to people who only view the world through the lens of pure optimization, whether that's optimizing for lower carbon or lower viral spread or higher GDP, you end up with a society that only reflects those narrow values.
The spreadsheets might look beautiful. The society might become highly efficient on paper,
But
but it will become deeply unjust, totally unresponsive, and completely alienating for the people who actually have to bleed and sweat within that system.
which brings us to the philosophical counterargument to expert rule. If efficiency isn't the ultimate goal of a society, what is?
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this is where the concept of dignity enters the chat.
Dignity. Let's explore that.
And I want to connect this directly to you, the person listening to this right now. You might not have a doctorate in macroeconomic theory. You might not know how to calibrate a supply chain.
Most people don't.
Right. But
Wow.
you still have to wake up every single day and live under the laws created by these institutions. Your rent, your health care, your ability to start a business or send your kids to school your entire life is shaped by these policies.
Democracy does not claim that everyone is equally informed. That is a straw man argument used by technocrats.
Please say that again.
Democracy fully concedes that we are vastly unequal in our knowledge and our skills, but it insists that we are absolutely equal in our dignity.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. So, equal political standing isn't about being as smart as the expert.
No, not at all.
It's essentially the right not to be dominated. It is the right to stand up and say, I am a member of this society. I bear the consequences of these laws. I am the one who loses my job or pays the tax. And therefore, I have a right to a voice in the direction we are heading.
Yes, exactly that.
It doesn't matter if the person trying to steer the ship has 3 PhDs from Harvard. They are not naturally born to rule over you without your consent.
That is the ultimate impenetrable defense of democracy against technocracy. It is the assertion that simply being a member of a shared political world grants you a voice, period. No credentials required.
But this leaves us with a massive, almost paralyzing standoff.
How so?
Well, if we go back to the first half of our discussion, we acknowledge that we desperately need expert wisdom to survive.
Right. We need the captain to navigate the hurricane, or we die.
But in the second half, we just established that we absolutely require democratic equality to maintain our human dignity and moral agency. We get to choose the vacation destination.
Correct.
So how do these two opposing forces actually share power in the real world? We can't just live in a philosophical debate. We have to build actual governments. Have we ever successfully put a fence around the experts?
We have, actually. It's not a perfect science, but the way we structure governments to handle this tension usually falls along a spectrum.
Okay, let's trace that spectrum.
If we look at the mechanics of how power is distributed, there are generally 4 distinct tiers of what expert rule looks like in practice. It starts very mildly and scales up to complete domination.
Where does it start? Let's go tier by tier.
Tier 1 is the most common and least controversial. We can call it more influence, not more votes.
Okay, what does that look like?
In this model, experts act purely as high-level advisors. They do the research, they map the terrain, they provide rigorous evidence to the political leaders, but they have absolutely no formal power to execute the policy.
So the final say remains entirely democratic.
Yes. The elected politicians, who can be fired by the voters, make the final call.
So that's like the president having a council of economic advisors. They can tell him raising tariffs is a terrible idea, but if he wants to do it anyway because his voters demand it, he can. The experts just advise.
Exactly. That's tier 1. But then we step up to tier 2, which is where it gets much more complicated.
What's tier 2?
Institutional independence.
Yeah.
This is where we intentionally take power away from the voters and the politicians and give it directly to the experts.
Wait, really?
Yes, we create bodies like central banks, public health agencies, or the Supreme Courts, and we insulate them from direct political pressure. We put them in a protective bubble.
Hold on, let me challenge that.
Ego.
Because tier 2 seems to directly contradict everything we just said, about dignity and democracy.
I know, it sounds hypocritical.
It does. Why on earth do we accept that an unelected, unaccountable board of bankers gets to decide the cost of borrowing money for the entire country?
It's a massive amount of power.
If the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, it can trigger a recession and cost millions due to their jobs. Why isn't that subject to a democratic vote?
Because we have collectively recognized, often through painful historical experience, that certain technical domains are uniquely vulnerable to the short-term panic of democratic politics.
Okay, explain that.
Monetary stability is the absolute classic example. Walk me through what happens if we democratize the money printer.
Oh, wow. Okay. Imagine if Congress politicians, who are desperate to be reelected every 2 or 4 years, had direct control over interest rates.
What would they do?
There would be an overwhelming, irresistible temptation to artificially lower rates right before every single election.
Free money, economic boom.
Everyone feels rich, and the incumbent gets reelected. But the hangover from that would be massive inflation.
Exactly. Rampant, uncontrollable inflation that would eventually destroy the currency. The politicians would optimize for the next election, not the next decade.
So we need an adult in the room.
Look at the 2008 financial crisis. When the global banking system was melting down, the Federal Reserve stepped in with massive, highly complex liquidity injections and bailouts to stabilize the system.
And people were furious. There was a massive populist backlash. People felt like the bankers who caused the crash were being rewarded, while ordinary homeowners lost everything.
They were furious, and ethically, they had every right to be. The optics were terrible. But mathematically, if the Federal Reserve had to wait for a polarized, angry Congress to hold a democratic vote on every single esoteric liquidity maneuver, the global financial system likely would have collapsed into a second Great Depression.
So they needed to act fast.
The speed and technical precision required to stop the bleeding could only be executed by an independent, expert body that didn't have to worry about poll numbers.
So we accept a little bit of undemocratic insulation to protect the house from burning down. We say, okay, the monetary system is too volatile for a town hall meeting. You handle it.
Yes. We see the same logic with disease control. You cannot have quarantine protocols or vaccine approvals dictated by whatever is currently trending on social media.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And judicial interpretation must be protected from the whims of a populist mob. These domains need a time horizon that outlasts the next election cycle.
That makes a lot of practical sense. But let's keep moving down the spectrum, because if Tier 2 is the compromise, Tiers 3 and 4 sound like the danger zones. What happens next?
The spectrum shifts dramatically at Tier 3. Weighted political power.
Weighted power.
Yes. This isn't just insulating a central bank. This is formally giving experts more direct voting power or superior legal influence over society at large simply because of their credentials.
Let's visualize this, because it's so offensive to modern sensibilities. Imagine walking into your local polling place on Election Day.
Okay, I'm there.
You step up to the booth, and you cast your vote for the next president or the next law. But the person in line behind it, let's say they have a master's degree in public policy, or they passed a standardized civic science test. They cast their ballot, and the machine counts it 3 times.
Wow.
Your vote counts once. Their vote counts 3 times. It feels viscerally wrong. It feels like putting a VIP fast pass lane at the ballot box.
It feels wrong because it violates that exact core principle of dignity we spent so much time on.
Right.
Tier 3 explicitly, legally states that your life, your perspective, and your stake in the country are literally worth less to the state than someone who holds your credential.
And finally, Tier 4 is just the end game of that logic, right?
Yes, technocracy. Absolute rule by expert administrators. There are no elections. There is no democratic input. The specialists are fully in charge of both the means and the ends.
They decide how to steer the ship, and they decide where the ship is going.
And if you complain, you are dismissed as an uneducated nuisance.
Okay, so looking at this whole spectrum, where does society actually stand right now?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it becomes very clear where the modern consensus lies. Healthy democracies comfortably accept and even rely upon Tiers 1 and 2.
Advice and independent agencies?
Exactly. But they fiercely, aggressively reject Tiers 3 and 4, weighted voting and technocracy.
But here's my question. Where exactly is the boundary? Because it feels like a very slippery slope. How do we know when a genuinely helpful independent agency from Tier 2 starts creeping into an untouchable technocracy in Tier 4?
The line is crossed much more easily than we like to admit. And when we cross it, when we insulate experts too much, We don't just lose the flavor of democracy, we actively invite elite oppression.
This brings us to the explicit warnings about what happens when the lab coat becomes a straitjacket.
The danger zones.
Precisely. Let's talk about the dark side of expertise.
The most glaring danger is that the term expertise can very easily become a socially acceptable mask for class rule.
So it's not really about knowledge.
Often, no. When society says we should just let the experts govern, what that often translates to in practice is we should let the highly credentialed, the socially powerful, and the economically secure govern.
We touched on this with a yellow vest example, but I want to dive deeper into this concept of lived experience.
It's crucial.
Because it's not just a buzzword, it's a massive gap in how policy is formed. Let's look at international trade.
Great example.
In the 1990s and 2000s, you had armies of economic experts, brilliant people at the top universities and think tanks, who looked at the data and concluded that massive free trade agreements and globalization were a net positive.
And strictly looking at the macroeconomic data, they were largely correct. The aggregate wealth of the nation increased. The spreadsheets were green.
But the spreadsheet doesn't tell the whole story. Let's say that free trade agreement causes a massive manufacturing company to relocate its operations overseas to save on labor costs.
Which happens all the time.
Right. So in a major city, maybe people just enjoy cheaper flat-screen TVs. But in a small factory town in the Midwest, that single plant closing means 5,000 people lose their jobs overnight.
Devastating.
The local diners go out of business because no one has disposable income. The property values plummet, meaning the schools lose their tax funding. The social fabric of the community unravels, leading to spikes in addiction and despair.
But the economist in the Capitol looks at the data and says, this is a necessary market correction and overall GDP is up 2%.
Right. But the spreadsheet doesn't feel the pain. The people do. The spreadsheet doesn't know what it means to lose a community's entire way of life.
The experts had the technical abstraction, but they completely lacked the lived experience of the collateral damage.
If the people in that town don't have a way to fight back against that policy, they're essentially living under a dictatorship of economists.
This is exactly why a functioning society absolutely requires what we call contestability.
Contestability. I'm not sure I fully grasp how that works in practice. What does it actually look like?
Think of it as the ultimate pressure release valve of a civilization. Contestability means that ordinary people must have meaningful, structural ways to stand up and say to the experts, this policy is hurting us, or your priorities are fundamentally wrong.
And it has to be more than just saying it, right?
Crucially, yes. They must have the power to force the system to change course. It is the ability to actually contest the ruling.
So it's not just the right to complain on the internet. It's the right to vote out the politicians who appointed the experts. It's the right to strike. It's the right to bring a lawsuit to halt a regulation.
Exactly. If you build a technocracy where the experts are so insulated that public feedback is irrelevant, you destroy the legitimacy of the entire political order.
Because if citizens feel politically irrelevant, if they feel like they are just cargo locked in the hold while the captain steers wherever he wants, they won't just sit there quietly.
They will eventually break down the door. They will elect a populist who promises to burn the whole ship down, just despite the captain.
Precisely. A democracy without expertise is reckless, but expertise without democracy is arrogant.
A morally legitimate order must leave room for the public to challenge authority, even if, and perhaps especially if that authority is highly educated.
Okay, I have a provocative question for you. Based on everything we've just discussed, let's test this.
I'm ready.
Let's say we have two options for a society. Option A is a perfectly efficient, mathematically flawless technocracy run by geniuses, but it completely ignores the human experience and suffering of its citizens.
Okay, option A.
Option B is a slightly inefficient, messy, sometimes frustrating democracy that actually listens to its people and occasionally makes a suboptimal technical choice because of it. Is option B actually superior?
Based on the ethical framework of human dignity, the answer is an unequivocal yes. Option B is infinitely superior.
Even if it's less efficient.
Because a perfectly efficient system that strips away moral agency is not a success story. It is a dystopia disguised as optimization. Efficiency is a metric, not a moral virtue.
That is a powerful distinction. Efficiency is a metric, not a virtue.
Mm-hmm.
And that realization really leads us to the ultimate conclusion here. We don't have to be trapped in this binary choice.
We really don't.
We do not have to choose between Ignorant populism on one side, where we reject all science, and arrogant technocracy on the other, where we surrender all our freedom.
Yeah.
There is a sweet spot.
Yes, there is a synthesis.
Yeah.
We need to look at the roadmap for how a healthy society should actually function, balancing both the need for truth and the demand for equality.
Let's lay out that ideal framework. What is the gold standard?
The ideal is not equal ignorance for all. We shouldn't pretend that every random opinion on viral modeling or bridge engineering is equally scientifically valid.
Right. My opinion on a bridge isn't as good as an engineer's.
Exactly. But the ideal is also not let the experts rule unchecked. The gold standard is this: democratic government guided, constrained, and rigorously informed by expertise.
I like to think of this using a GPS analogy. Think about driving a car.
Oh, I like this.
The experts are the GPS satellite system. They have the absolute best, most accurate empirical data on where the traffic jams are, where the bridge is out, and what the fastest road is from point A to point B. You would be an idiot to ignore the GPS and just drive blind.
A very apt metaphor. The GPS provides the means.
Exactly. But you are the driver.
Yeah.
You are the sovereign citizen. You ultimately decide if you actually want to go to that destination.
Right.
You decide if you'd rather take the scenic route, even if it takes 20 minutes longer, because you value the view more than the efficiency. The GPS informs the journey, but it never gets to step on the gas pedal.
It is a delicate, intentional balance. In this model, experts are essential. They map the terrain. And as we discussed with our Federal Reserve example, we do grant certain institutions a degree of independence to protect critical functions from short-term panic.
But the foundational rule remains. The citizens are ultimately sovereign.
Expertise informs the process. Democracy legitimizes the process. Constitutional rights constrain the power of everyone involved. And vigorous public criticism, that contestability we talked about, remains possible at all times.
This model solves the tension between means and ends. It reiterates the guiding principle. Experts should be granted significant authority in determining the means, because that is where specialized knowledge prevents disaster.
But they must never have absolute control over the ends, because the ends dictate our shared human values.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? How should you interact with expert advice in your daily life? I think the takeaway here is a profound shift in how we view authority.
Experts are not your rulers, they are your advisors.
Exactly. They are here to help govern, to provide the blueprints and the radar readings, but they are never here to replace the people. In a functioning democracy, you are the sovereign.
It is a framework that demands a very difficult dual respect. A free society must cultivate deep knowledge without letting it breed arrogance, and it must simultaneously cultivate democratic equality without breeding a contempt for knowledge. It is not an easy balance to maintain.
It is incredibly difficult, but it's the only way a free society survives. We have covered massive ground today. We started with the sheer visceral allure of the surgeon in the operating room.
That incredibly human desire to just hand our terrifyingly complex problems over to the smartest people in the room and say, fix it.
We discovered the profound moral necessity of giving everyone a voice, not because we all have the same facts, but because we all possess the same inherent dignity. We explored the very real dangers of letting elites masquerade as undisputed authorities, turning their lack of lived experience into a blunt instrument that destroys communities.
And finally, we arrived at this delicate, essential balance, a democracy that is fiercely guided by facts, but ultimately unapologetically driven by shared human values.
Before we close, I want to pose a few reflection questions directly to you, the listener, to carry forward.
Yes, think about this. When public decisions become incredibly technical, whether it's climate regulations or economic policy, how much trust should you personally place in the experts? Where do you draw the line?
Where do you think expertise deserves special authority? And where should your public equality remain absolute and unquestioned?
And finally, what do you believe is actually more dangerous? Politics operating without knowledge, or knowledge operating without democratic accountability?
Those are the questions that will define the survival of democracy in the 21st century. And speaking of the 21st century, I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought that builds on everything we've unpacked today.
Where are we heading?
Well, we have spent this entire deep dive talking about human experts. We've talked about their biases, their class interests, their geographic isolation, and their lack of lived experience.
Right.
But as we look to the very near future, we are increasingly handing complex policy analysis over to artificial intelligence. We are using algorithms for economic forecasting, for urban planning, for medical triaging, and even for judicial sentencing guidelines.
We are building systems that process data on a scale that no human mind can even comprehend.
The ultimate flawless calculators.
Exactly.
So here is the question. How do you democratically contest the decisions of a black box algorithm? If we worry that human experts with PhDs are too socially detached to understand the pain of a factory town closing, what happens when the ultimate expert in the room isn't human at all?
Wow.
What happens when you are wheeled into that operating room and the surgeon holding the scalpel isn't a person who recognizes your human dignity, but a machine that only recognizes your data?
A chilling but absolutely necessary frontier for us to consider as we navigate this balance.
Something to think about the next time you ask your phone for directions. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking the hard questions, keep challenging the simple answers, and we will see you next time.